Today we're going to take a look at two completely different launchers. They might look similar, but they're quite different. Different in price, different in size, different in caliber, different in CO2, different in a lot of ways, but similar in one very important way. These launchers both have systems built in to puncture your CO2 cartridge while pulling the trigger. That's important because what we have had in the past, and what is very common, is a puncture cap. You would load your CO2 cartridge into the handle, and then to pierce that CO2, you push on the bottom of the puncture cap, and now your marker, your launcher, is pressurized and ready to shoot. Most require a slapping type motion. Some require a twisting motion of some kind. Not this one. This is definitely just a slapping motion. The CO2 sticks out of the bottom and you actually grab the CO2 and twist it. Those are not ideal. So these two companies built systems into their launchers to reduce the number of steps it takes to engage a target. So with these, you draw your launcher, you aim it. That's it. With this, you draw your launcher, you activate your CO2, and then you aim. So both of these launchers have a system built in to puncture the CO2. In these, the CO2 will be under the barrel, both of these. But all you have to do is pull the trigger. Byrna calls it pull pierce. That's their sort of branding name for their technology. Now, P2P, this is an Umarex brand. It says Umarex on the side right here. The Prepared to Protect Secure 68 also has a system, and it's called the Response Ready Trigger. That's their branding for it. But they're both systems that do very similar things. Now, I noticed when I tested this launcher in the past, I was getting really good numbers on that first trigger pull, but I was firing quite slow. I was pulling the trigger quite slowly, and I want some numbers for not just a slow trigger pull because I think that favors this launcher. I want some numbers on a fast trigger pull because I think we'd get lower numbers. That's part of what I'm going to test today. And my main focus is the percentage. I'm going to call the second round on each of these launchers 100% power, and then I'm going to measure and give you the percentage of power that first round would give you. For instance, if this guy fires 400 feet per second on its second shot, and it fires 200 feet per second on its first shot, that's a 50%. You're getting 50% of the power on that first shot. So I'm going to do a little testing, and I'm going to see what kind of percentages we get. It's not about who has the most joules or who has the most feet per second. Those numbers are going to be different. Don't worry about the highest joules here. We're looking at the percentage. So let's go out to the garage and take a look. Now I'm going to test the percentage difference between the first shot and the second shot with the Byrna CL using Byrna's own kinetic rounds. But since I'm measuring a percentage drop, I don't think the weight of the rounds matters as much. The temperature won't matter as much. The CO2 I'm using won't matter as much. Really, I'm measuring the percentage difference between the first and second round. Basically comparing Byrna's pull-to-pierce technology versus the P2P Secure 68 response-ready trigger. That's what I'm interested in here. I want to know, is the pull-to-pierce technology on par with the new response-ready trigger, or should I be looking at it differently? Should I say, is the response-ready trigger up to par with the known quantity, the guys that have been around for a while and have had this feature for years. Let's see. Let's see who comes out on top. Here we go. 2 rounds. Now what I intend to do, this won't take very many rounds to test. I'm going to just fire the first and second round, and I'm going to do a fast trigger pull and also a slow trigger pull to see if that makes a difference. I don't think it's going to make much difference for the Byrna. It could make a difference for the P2P Secure 68. I noticed that I got really good numbers on that first round with the Secure 68, and I need to know if the speed of that first trigger pull makes a difference. I think it will, but we got to test. Let's find out. So let's do 2 rounds with the Byrna. $182. Second shot. Oh boy. It went everywhere. 410. Big difference. Now that was a slow trigger pull. Let's do it again a little bit faster. The fast trigger pull, Byrna CL, going for the fast trigger pull now. I have an idea of what's going to happen. It's probably going to be in that sub 200 range or near 200 feet per second, followed by close to 400 feet per second. That's the performance and behavior that I typically get with this launcher. And trigger pull so far hasn't really made a difference, but let's find out. $200 on the nose. Second round. $394. Now testing the Secure 68P, doing a percentage test. So this is, don't pay too much attention to the max numbers. We're not trying to go for the highest joule numbers. We're just measuring the percentage difference between the first shot and the second shot with 2 different trigger pulls. So this is going to take at least 4 shots and 2 CO2 cartridges to test. So I've got it loaded up. So right now, this is a cold launcher, so don't expect to get 21 joules out of it. You know, that's not what I'm going for. I want to know the difference in power between that first and second shot, because I think that is really the highlight of this launcher, perhaps. It's really something that needs to be tested. So I'm going to test it. Let's do this. We're going to go with the slow trigger pull first. $264. Second shot. $270. Now let's change out that CO2 cartridge and test a fast trigger pull and see if we get the same kind of performance, or if the performance is degraded a little further, which I expect it will be. I don't expect to get the same kind of performance, but let's find out. I know I'm curious, so I think someone out there is probably curious about this too. Now for the fast trigger pull test, I'm going to fire 2 rounds. And I don't mean fire 2 rounds quickly. I mean pull the trigger quickly on that first round. The second round shouldn't matter. We're going to do the second round just for comparison's sake. But I'm not trying to get 2 rounds off quickly. I'm trying to get 1 round off as quickly as possible with a fast trigger pull and measure that performance drop. So let's see what happens. Secure 68P, fast trigger pull. $180. Second round. $274. That's an interesting result. It dropped a lot on the fast trigger pull. Really a lot. So let's see. So I'm going to repeat that test. There was a huge percentage difference between the first and second shot with a fast trigger pull. Really quite big. So just for the sake of being thorough, I'm going to redo that test. More points of data never hurt, so let's see what happens. Now, keep in mind, I've got a cold launcher here, so don't expect the highest numbers. We're not going for the highest numbers. We're just measuring the percentage difference again. So let's see what happens. This is going to be a fast trigger pull. $202. Second round. $268. I feel like the percentage was a little better, a little different on that one, but we've got enough data that we can analyze that. We can talk about that. I just did some testing in the garage. I showed you that footage. Now, I did show you the feet per second already. I'm not bothering to calculate the joules. We know this guy is about 19 joules. This one is less than that. But that's not important. We're only looking at the percentage. So, like I said, 100% power is going to be your second shot. Now, from there, we need to figure out what's the percentage that you get from your first shot compared to your second. Now, I tested both of these with fast trigger pulls and with slow trigger pulls because it makes a difference, especially for this one. So the Byrna, I can't really say that the slow trigger pull is going to give you more power. It doesn't really seem to help. In fact, when I tested out in the garage just now, my slow trigger pull was considerably less powerful than the fast trigger pull. I was not expecting that. But on my first test with a slow trigger pull, I got 44% of the power that you get from your second shot. Only 44%. And then when I tested it with a fast trigger pull, I got 51%. Now, 50% seems to be about right compared to my previous testing with this. I often got around 200 feet per second with Byrna's lightweight kinetic projectiles. These are 3.09 grams or 3.1, something like that. So the feet per second, 400 feet per second sounds pretty good, but it's quite a light projectile, so the numbers are going to be kind of high. But I remember, this is the one I got shot with, but I remember getting around 200 and then 400, so 50% power out of that first shot. So what's more interesting is the behavior of the P2P Secure 68, because I tested that with a slow trigger pull and I got 98% of the power that I got from my second shot. 98%. Now I tested the fast trigger pull twice and I got 66% and then I got 75%. That's 2/3 the amount of power as your second shot, and then 3/4 the amount of power as your second shot. Now, I'm not here to tell you what to buy or which system works for you better, but 44 and 51% versus, on the worst case scenario, 66 and 75%. And then in addition to that, if you do a slow trigger pull, you can get consistently 95% or better. I went back and I calculated from my testing of my first video of the Secure 68P. Now, in that video, I did a slow trigger pull, but it was not in an effort to get higher numbers on that trigger pull. I was just doing what I consider a normal trigger pull when you're trying to be somewhat accurate and hit a target. I was firing into a target tent. I needed to make sure I hit it. So I used a normal slow trigger pull. The way you would fire if you were at a gun range and you were trying to be somewhat accurate and hit the middle of a target. That's the kind of trigger pull that I used. Now, when I went back and calculated all those numbers, I tested 5 different types of ammunition. I got 97%, 96%, 98%, 98%, 97% of the power of the second round. That's pretty damn good if you ask me. So in my previous video, I touched on a lot of things that are just nice to haves, such as the new CO2 cap, the metal magazine, the fiber optic sights, ambidextrous magazine release, magazine disconnect, all kinds of things, hammer, all kinds of stuff. But what is the takeaway from this launcher? The thing that I think should put this launcher on your radar, and I guarantee is on other manufacturers' radar, is the fact that it has that response-ready trigger that actually reduces a step so you can get on aim faster and increases your chances of survival in an emergency. These are capacity-starved devices, meaning you only get typically 6 rounds. 6 rounds is an extremely common capacity for a less lethal device. If you're lucky, you'll get 6 + 1, 7 + 1, something like that. But 6 is really common, and you can't afford for one of those rounds, especially the first one, to be ineffective. At 44% the power of your second round, or 50%, I think 50% is a good average number probably for this. That first round isn't going to be effective, or as effective. Now there's a way to pre-puncture that CO2 with the Byrna CL. What you do is you place your finger behind the trigger, and then you pull the trigger back about this far with your other finger and let go, and then you'll get 100% power out of your first round instead of your second. But this system, this pull pierce system, and the response ready trigger, they're designed to reduce the number of steps between drawing and aiming. So why would you then add a step in there when they put engineering effort into that? Why add a step when you're paying to remove that step? So why add it back in? It doesn't make sense to me. Now, I don't know if there's a similar method that you can do for this, but you don't need it. All you have to do is pull the trigger in a slow, controlled fashion, and you can get 95+% of the power as your most powerful round. So, you guys tell me, what what do you think about this? I tend to think that the response-ready trigger is just a little bit more advanced, a little more... I said I wasn't going to say advanced. It's a little more usable. It gives me a little more confidence because you're not going to have time to add extra steps. You just won't. If you're lucky, you'll use one hand to lift a cover garment and then draw with your other hand and then bring this hand up, something like that. But it has to be quick. It has to be very quick. You're not going to have time to twist a thing or puncture a thing, or, you know, that's just my opinion. These systems are the way to go. And it seems to me that the response-ready trigger is the system to go with right now. So if Umarex ever sees this, if Prepared to Protect sees this, if T4E ever sees this, any of those companies, please put the response-ready trigger in other products. I'm sure that must be their plan. I don't know if it is, but this is a great system in my opinion, and it needs to be. This is the way forward as far as piercing your CO2 goes. It reduces a step and it gives you a usable first round. So that's just my opinion. I'd like to hear yours. I'd like to see other people do this same kind of testing. The only reason I didn't do more of it is because I'm a little low on CO2. And when you're only testing those first 2 rounds, that's all that's relevant in your test, you're burning through CO2 really quickly. So that's the only reason I didn't do more testing. But I'd love to see other people's results. Is there a way to get more than 50% power on that first round without adding an extra step, with just doing a certain type of trigger pull? If there is, I don't know about it, so let me know. And if you've got your Secure 68P already, let me know in the comments. This is a little bit of an opinion video, but I'd like to hear other opinions. I'd like to hear other test results. The more data points we have, the better, in my opinion. So that's it for this one. Thanks, everybody.